Good evening. At this time, please silence your cell phones and be advised these proceedings are being recorded. If you're physically present, and you desire to address the City Council during the meeting, please complete a request to speak form available at the front entrance and present it to the City Clerk. Speakers physically present and participating via Zoom will be called upon at the appropriate time, and each person is allowed 3 minutes speaking. At this time, our City Clerk will make a Zoom broadcasting announcement. Madam City Clerk.
Thank you, Mayor. As of June 15th, the City of Grand Terrace reopened its public meetings. Therefore, tonight's meeting of March 9th is open to the public. Please be advised that face masks are required, social distancing will be practiced, and occupancy limits will be enforced. Additionally, pursuant to Section 3 of Executive Order N2920 issued by Governor Newsom, tonight's meeting will also be conducted telephonically through Zoom and broadcast live on the city's website and Channel 3. If you would like to participate telephonically and speak on an agenda item, you can access the meeting by dialing 1-669-900-9128, enter meeting ID 895-5176-4559, and enter password 194341. You will be placed in the waiting room, muted until it is your turn to speak. You may also submit your comments by sending them to ccpubliccomment@grandterrace-ca.gov. The City of Grand Terrace thanks you for taking all precautions to prevent spreading COVID-19.
Thank you, Madam City Clerk. At this time, I will call to order the regular meeting of the City of Grand Terrace for March 9th, 2021. Tonight, our invocation will be offered by Mayor Pro Tem Bill Hussey, and our Pledge of Allegiance will be led by City Attorney Adrian Guerra. Please stand for the invocation and remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Let us pray. Dear Lord, thank you for everything you've done for this city, our many blessings, God. And I just ask that you be with our residents here who are struggling and who just need you, Lord, more than anything. And I just ask that you continue to guide this council and give us wisdom that we need for the betterment of this city. And I ask that you protect our first responders and all our residents, God. And God bless this nation and God bless this state. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen.
Please place your right hand over your heart and begin after me. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Thank you, Mr. City Attorney. Madam City Clerk, may we have roll call, please?
Councilmember Allen.
Here.
Councilmember Wilson.
I am here.
Councilmember Robles. Present. Mayor Pro Tem Hussey.
Here.
Mayor McNabo.
Present.
Madam Mayor, you have a quorum.
Thank you. So our first item of business tonight is our special presentations. We have with us to talk about the American Rescue Plan, our United States Representative, Pete Aguilar, California's 31st District Congressman. Thank you so much for staying up late and being with us tonight.
Good evening, Grand Terrace. Thank you so much, Mayor. I appreciate that. Thank you for having me. It is a little bit of a late night. We just got done voting, so I am all yours. But thank you for the opportunity, Mayor. And I just wanted to run through just a few things to share with you and the council, and then I'm happy to take any questions that you guys might have. The first is to let you know that the American Rescue Plan is going to be headed to the President's desk tomorrow. We'll be voting on final passage tomorrow morning, where we expect to have the votes. The President indicated that he will sign this piece of legislation that will do a lot of things for the Inland Empire, but specific to Grand Terrace, I wanted to talk with you about the state and local funding. Within the bill, we advocated for and fought for robust state and local government as a part of this package, and I'm thankful that we were able to deliver on that. The share that Grand Terrace will receive is $2.3 million. Now, I know many communities have asked, okay, how is this going to work? So your share will be delivered through the state. The state will pass that down without any fees associated with it. They are required by law to pass it straight down to non-entitlement cities. So you may hear that other cities are receiving a direct contribution directly from the Treasury. So similar to your CDBG formulas and guidance, entitlement cities receive that money directly from the Treasury. Non-entitlement cities like Grand Terrace will receive the pass down through the state. The state is required to do that pass down within 60 days. So this is, and half of the dollars will be passed down immediately. And the next half will be 12 months from now. So it's the 2.3 number. So divided by 2 would be the share that would be received within 60 days of the state passed down through the Treasury. Mayor, and we've been talking to other cities, and from a transparency and accountability perspective, my thought, and with all the respect in the world to the work that you and members of the council do, but my hope is that Grand Terrace will work with other cities and to just put a one-page communication item at a future agenda to talk about how you're expending these resources, just so everybody knows, from a transparency and accountability perspective, the jobs that were saved, the library hours that can now be extended, whatever it might be. And keep in mind that these dollars are much more flexible than CARES Act dollars that were received by municipalities last year. We've all been through a lot with the pandemic, and I know our communities and Grand Terrace has been through a lot. So we wanted to make sure that these were as flexible as possible, and so they can not only be used for direct COVID issues and direct expenses associated with COVID, but they can also help address budget gaps that have transpired as a result of declining sales tax. So all of those things would be eligible and acceptable. But whatever Grand Terrace chooses to do with these funds, whether it's creating a new small business program, which I know you folks did previously, and I tip my hat to you, or whether it's to address budget gaps on the operations side, whatever it might be, those decisions are yours. I just think that from a transparency and accountability perspective, it might be in our best interest to just have a communication item at some point in the future and to just let the community know that the American Rescue Plan is delivering for Grand Terrace. The last item, before I take any questions that you might have, is please continue to work with my staff and my team. Kurt Lewis is on the Zoom somewhere, and we want to avail ourselves to you on the grants and program side to make sure that Grand Terrace has access to any type of community grants that we might offer. We made news a little bit in the House of Representatives by talking a little bit about community programs and ensuring that we had an opportunity, members of Congress had an opportunity to help guide those federal project requests that communities might make. And so as we develop that criteria and roll that out soon, we definitely want to be responsive to the residents of Grand Terrace. And so we'll take our cues from you, Mayor, and from the city manager and the council, but to the extent that you can pick and prioritize needs that could be eligible for additional federal help and resources, please, work with our office and, maybe put a resolution on the council agenda, kind of ranking these priorities that you see for future needs. And this would be kind of an ongoing conversation. Each year we might have an opportunity to look at whether it's partnering with nonprofits or partnering with directly with local governments or regional entities. So those are just the items that I was thinking through, Mayor, and I'm happy to take any questions that the council has.
Thank you, Congressman. I appreciate that. What questions does the council have at this time? Councilmember Robles.
Thank you so much for all your assistance. This particular fund, I haven't been able to read anything, but when you say there's no strings attached, do you have to have suffered some actual budget loss? For instance, our sales tax actually went up.
Well, you would be allowed to use so hypothetically, if you had growth in sales tax, you wouldn't use this to replace that amount. But any type of COVID-related expense would be eligible. And so there will be a process to identify a certification of needs that will go through the state. But our understanding is that allocation will be yours, irrespective of whether you had declining sales tax. Everybody has suffered as a result of the pandemic, and we want to make sure that our essential workers who work for our states and communities are protected, and that every community has an opportunity to share a little bit in the resources that we're passing. This is a large package. It's unprecedented to meet the unprecedented public health crisis and economic crisis that we've seen throughout our communities. But every community is going to be a little different, council member, and we want to respect that as well.
Thank you.
As we look at what we might use these funds for, and there's quite a bit as far as Grand Terrace is concerned, I see that we can look again to our businesses who have had a rough time. Is there an opportunity to help with homeowners maybe that have had mortgage issues or other opportunities like that?
Yeah, so a couple points, Mayor. If Grand Terrace wants to look at creating something similar to what you did in small business, that would be applicable. But I did want to also mention that there are separate buckets of funds that are going to the state as well to address some of these issues. So the rental assistance component is a part of this. Homeowners assistance is a part of this package as well. Those are a little bit more formulaic, and those would go through the state. And so then likely the county would be the applicant or the entity applying for funds. And so similar to other categories of funds, the county would apply, and Grand Terrace residents would be eligible for those funds. But if you wanted to do something specific, I don't see any reason that would preclude you from using these funds for that in a similar way to the small business program that you stood up. I will also say, one of the things that this package includes is $25 billion in a separate new bucket for restaurants. We know so many of them used the PPP program that was a vital lifeline. This package also, the American Rescue Plan, also creates a new line item for the SBA, specifically for restaurants who suffered declining revenue in calendar year 2020. So realizing that and trying to account for that, every industry, every sector was impacted, but we know some of those small businesses, not the chains, but some of our small businesses in our communities deserved a little bit of help. So this does account for that. That program would have to be stood up, so that will take a little bit more time, but the SBA will be the entity who will be responsible to administer that new program.
Okay, thank you for that. Not specific to our city, but the schools, was there money allocated towards schools in this bill as well?
There was, and Colton Joint Unified did receive, the line item is $61 million to Colton Joint Unified School District. Obviously that would apply, and our thinking on that was finances should not be the driver on whether school districts reopen. It's a local control decision. It's a decision, and Mayor, I'm a fan of local control, but these are decisions that our local communities and our local school districts are going to have to make. But cost should not be a factor in whether they choose to reopen or not. So they have to account for additional expenses, whether it's portables to meet social distancing, or whether it's continued look and maintenance on ventilation and airflow systems, whatever it might be. We wanted to make sure that cost was not a barrier to making a decision. And so significant funding, hundreds of millions of dollars going to San Bernardino County schools as a result of this package. So like I said, $61 million passed through the state to Colton Joint Unified. I had a conference call with the superintendents and the school board presidents last week, and we talked about this, as well as San Bernardino County schools. So significant funding throughout.
All right, well, thank you very much. Do members of staff have questions for the congressman?
I do not, Mayor. I was fortunate to be on the call that the congressman had a couple of weeks ago, and he was very effective in terms of laying out these numbers for us, and it's very exciting for us.
All right, well, thank you. One last time for my colleagues. All right. Well, I'm going to thank you again for bringing us some good news and for, again, staying up late and joining us at our council meeting. Certainly, as we work with these funds, we will communicate what has been done with them. And again, I appreciate seeing you here tonight, and have a wonderful evening.
Let me know how we can help, Mayor. I'm always a fan of yours, and I want the council and the community to succeed. So if there's anything that my team or I can do, please feel free to let us know. We're available at any point.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Good night. Right, back to our agenda. Do we have any reordering of, additions to, or removal of items from the agenda?
We do not, Mayor.
All right, so we'll move to our consent calendar. Items on the consent calendar are expected to be routine and non-controversial. They will be acted upon by the city council at one time without discussion. Any council member, staff member, or citizen may request removal of an item from the consent calendar for discussion. Are there any requests for item removal?
No, Madam Mayor.
All right, I'll entertain a motion on the consent calendar then.
I move adoption of the consent calendar.
I'll second it.
All right, motion by Councilmember Robles, second by Councilmember Allen. Madam City Clerk, will you call the roll, please?
Councilmember Allen?
Yes.
Councilmember Wilson?
Yes.
Councilmember Robles?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Hussey?
Yes.
Mayor McNabo?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. So we'll move to public comment. This is the opportunity for members of the public to comment on items not appearing on the regular agenda. Because of restrictions contained in California law, the City Council may not discuss or act on any item not on the agenda, but may briefly respond to statements made or ask a question for clarification. I may also request a brief response from staff to questions raised during public comment, and the council may request that a matter be agendized for a future meeting. Request to speak at this time? Thank you. Ms. Patricia Farley. Yes. Oh, I'm sorry.
Again?
That's better.
Okay. What I have to tell you is extremely important for everybody here, for anybody who owns a property, they're single residents, or anybody who owns property in an HOA, or anybody that's renting. It has come to my attention that I believe it was October 2020, the state of California made some new legislation which effectively takes away the rights of all individual property owners to have any control or important control over their environment, their rights on property. Also, if you own a home in an association, it even takes away the rights of the board members of an association and dilutes the rules that have already been in place since you bought your property. They have changed it so that I know that they're trying to get, I'm very concerned about the homeless and the environment, but they are making it so that people can rent out their garages to individuals, and that people that own rental property and want to rent out, it's controlling everything, what you can do. You have to rent to almost anybody. You have to allow comfort animals that people want into your home, into associations. You can build a little shed in back of your house for people to live in, even if you're in a homeowner associations, okay? People don't realize that the laws there are conflicts in the laws, so that what's happening is homeowners, the associations, the attorneys are arguing cases and wasting tons of money that we don't have, the small associations or big associations, to fight to clear up the rules. That it is so out of control. They've tried to add rules over the years, and it's completely out of control. Let's see. I even when you buy a home in a homeowners association, the management companies, the property management companies can't advise them very much on the law. So what's happened is individual homeowners have been left completely helpless, as well as the association board members in enforcing rules to control the environment. Given the Gateway project, I'm not against development, but I'm against people not having driveways and using the garage for other things. No guest parking. We're going to have the Michigan Avenue will be horrible. The whole city will be horrible. This is out of control, and everybody needs to know about it. They need to talk to their legislators. I know their intent might have been good, but it's out of control. Please help us.
Thank you, Ms. Farley. I appreciate you coming in tonight to share that with us. Are there any other requests to speak during this time?
No, Madam Mayor.
All right, so we'll close public comment and return to our agenda. We have no public hearings, we have no unfinished business, so we'll move on to new business. Item number 4 on our agenda is an amendment number 1 to the agreement with Interwest Consulting Group for interim public works director and senior engineer services, changing the assigned interim public works director / senior engineer and increasing the contract amount from $150,000 to $200,000. We have Assistant City Manager Cynthia Fortune.
Evening, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, City Council. As the Mayor had stated, this is for the review and approval of the existing agreement with Interwest Consulting. As City Council is aware, our former Public Works Director moved on to a different city. And what we had done in the interim was to hire an interim Public Works Director / senior engineer from Interwest. Unfortunately, he too had run out of hours. And during that time, we did advertise, we received applications, and the city manager and the interim Public Works Director interviewed prospective candidates. An offer was made to one of those candidates, but unfortunately they had declined for medical reasons. At this time, in order to maintain continuity in providing public work services to the community, city staff is requesting to increase the contract amount from $150,000 to $200,000 on a month-to-month basis. It is the city's hope that we will fill the position before June of 2021. And so as Mr. Bradshaw, as a CalPERS annuitant has left, we now have Mr. Robert Eisenbeiss of Interwest, and he would be assigned to serve as the interim Public Works Director / senior engineer. I believe I was told that Mr. Eisenbeiss is in the audience, and he can come up to the microphone and speak a little about his experience. And that concludes my report, so I will ask Mr. Eisenbeiss to come up and say a few words about himself.
Thank you, Assistant City Manager Fortune.
Good evening, Mayor, Council.
Good evening.
Happy to be here and to help out. A little bit of my background. I've been with Interwest for about 1.5 years now. I retired from the city of Rialto, and so after that, they didn't take them very long to get a hold of me and see if that I would be willing to do some consulting work for them. So I've been doing that for about 1.5 years. Prior to that, I spent, again, about a little over 4 years as Public Works Director, City of Rialto, and City Engineer. And prior to that, I spent about 11 years as City Engineer of City of San Bernardino. Before my public sector experience, I had about 20 years of private experience, working on traffic engineering for the first part of my career, and then the second half of that was mostly land development and those types of activities. So most of my all of my public experience has been in San Bernardino County, so I'm very familiar with the county codes, county requirements, the SBCTA provisions, things like that. So I'm just trying to help keep things moving so that everything's smooth for the next candidate. Hopefully you're successful in recruiting that.
All right.
So.
Will you help me to pronounce your last name correctly?
Sure. It's Eisenbeiss.
Eisenbeiss?
Yeah, the Z is silent.
Okay. And did Rialto work with Interwest Consulting?
They didn't for Public Works, but they do for building services.
Okay.
We were able to do some of we didn't contract out everything in Public Works at Rialto, so I think we considered them though also.
All right, thank you. Do members of council have questions at this time? Councilmember Hussey. Oh, excuse me, Mayor Pro Tem Hussey.
Good evening. What were your projects that you'd done in Rialto? Can you just highlight some of the big ones?
Sure. As far as capital projects, one of the more significant projects was supporting the Renaissance Pacific Plan. You're probably aware of, I don't know if you are aware of the conversion of their airport into a new development, which is now all built. There was a significant capital component of that, you know, there's a partnership with the city, partnering with Lewis Development. And so I oversaw a lot of that construction. Started a fire station, which is under construction, I think, right now. That planning started while I was there. Built a couple of parks. One of the parks was a $2 million park that was just a small pocket park. And then there was another much larger park. And then the one that was under construction when I left was a large $18 million park project. So I think they're just putting the finishing touches on that project right now. In addition to that, all the usual routine paving, street paving, signal projects, the normal public works projects that you'd expect.
All right, thank you.
Councilmember Allen.
Thanks, Mayor. So I would like to ask this either Ms. Fortune or Mr. Eisenbeis, whoever can answer this. So why is this contract, why do we need $50,000 more for this contract? Are we getting $50,000 more in service than we had last year? Or is this just an annual cost of living increase of, what, 30%, what?
Assistant City
Councilmember
Manager
Allen? Yeah.
Fortune.
Assistant Fortune, yes. When we hired Mr. Bradshaw, the intent was only to keep him on an interim basis for several months. And we estimated that cost to be $150,000. We have since spent most of those funds. Unfortunately, we have not yet hired a full-time Public Works Director / senior engineer. So we wouldn't want ongoing projects to be delayed. So to continue that, we are requesting that, yes, the contract be increased by 50. We may not necessarily use all those funds because we intend to advertise and fill the position again. As it is stated, the contract is on a month-to-month basis. We are requesting that it be increased up to 50, up until such that we can fill it. And as I had mentioned, our intent is to fill the position with a full-time city employee before June.
Yeah. Thank you. So is our month-to-month cost increasing?
No, sir.
Okay.
The hourly cost is still the same. Yeah, it is based on the number of hours that the consultant will provide us. And I believe right now we have them at 30 hours per week.
Okay. That's all. Thank you.
Councilmember Hussey. Mayor Pro Tem Hussey. That's 2 coins in the jar.
Thank you. Ms. Fortune, how much would it cost, or what's our cost going to be when we hire a full-time staff compared to contract?
I'm sorry, Councilmember Hussey, I'm not sure I understood. What was the cost?
All right, what's the salary for a full-time staff with benefits going to be annually?
Annually for a Public Works / city engineer, $210.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any requests to speak on this item?
No, Madam Mayor.
All right, we'll close public comment and bring it back to council for consideration of a motion.
Madam Mayor,
Councilmember Allen.
so I'll make that motion to, let's see, where's the recommendation?
Packet page 28.
Yeah. Well, I'll staff recommendation.
Thank you.
Yes.
Second.
Okay, motion by Councilmember Allen, second by Councilmember Wilson. Please call the vote, Madam City Clerk.
Councilmember Allen,
Yes.
Councilmember Wilson. Yes. Councilmember Robles,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Hussey,
Yes.
Mayor McNamara.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. Item number 5 on our agenda is a FY 2019-2020 and FY 2020-21 budget update. Again, we have Assistant City Manager Cynthia Fortune.
Good evening, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, City Council. I will just wait for the PowerPoint. There you go. The staff report before you tonight is to provide City Council with year-end reports for 2019-20 actuals and 2021 projections. Next slide, please. The staff report supports our 2030 mission to preserve and protect our community and its exceptional quality of life through thoughtful planning within the constraints of fiscally responsible government. So the purpose of this review and the submittal to City Council, as we normally do during the course of the year, are threefold: to notify City Council of any significant variances in revenue and expense projections, to provide City Council with year-end actuals and projections, and show how these variances affect the city's fund balance, and to propose adjustments to preserve the city's reserves if necessary, if these variances in revenue and expense projections are actually going to affect it. Next slide, please. So at this time, I'm going to talk about the fiscal year 2019-20 year-end actuals as of June 30th, 2020. So when staff came to City Council on July 28th, when we had given our updated projections at the time of revenues, and this is what, with the information we knew then, we actually projected total revenues of $6 million. We had completed, again, we have not completed our audit, our internal audit, and these are now numbers that we ran as of the end of February 2021. So as you can see, our actual revenues recorded in fiscal year 29-20 are actually almost 6.5 million, 415,000 higher than what we expected. And as you can see, I put the variance, and the biggest being sales tax. When the pandemic hit, when they talked about the revenues that would be hit the most, they were talking about TOT, transient occupancy tax, or hotel tax, and sales tax. I think the city, we are very fortunate that even in the pandemic for fiscal year 19-20, we actually exceeded our projections by almost 120,000. So that was actually the biggest one. So we did good for revenues. And then the next one, please. So when we look at our expenditures, again, we projected 5.8 when we came to City Council in July, but in fiscal year 19-20, it was actually about 200,000 more than what was projected, and we provided the detail in the staff report. And the biggest increase really was the increase to the Sheriff's Department contract, because that was almost 80,000. That was actually our biggest increase. But looking at the lower portion of this report, as you can see, the revenues at 6.5 million, and almost 6.5, and expenditures of 6 million, we actually are 445,000 to the good. Now, if City Council remembers at the time, when we projected 250,000, City Council approved that 100,000 of that potential fund balance be allocated for additional overtime for the Sheriff's Department in fiscal year 2021. So next page, please. So I just wanted to show how this actually is going to affect the general fund balance and when we submit our audited report for fiscal year 19-20. Again, when we had revenue expense of 6.48 and an expense of 6 million, we had a 446,000 excess surplus that we were going to put to fund balance. But because, again, 100,000 was approved, we are projecting this. So And that should have said 6/30/2020. 6/30/2019, we had $1 million, and that is 17%, and that is 2 months of operating revenues. That is normally what is requested to keep as reserves. With the net increase of $346,000, we will now have a general fund reserves of $1.3 million, actually increasing our reserves to 22%, 5% higher than what GASB requires. So this is actually good for the city. We are padding our reserves in the event that, as you hear about the pandemic, they seem to think there's going to be a second, a third, or a fourth wave. So that concludes my report for fiscal year 2019-20 and the general fund balance. So now we're going to go to fiscal year 2021 for year-end projections. So I'd like to start with the biggest thing that we have learned, and we learned just recently within the last couple of months, that on December 30th, 2020, the county informed the redevelopment agency, our successor agency, and all affected taxing entities that they are going to change the method of distribution of residual redevelopment property tax trust fund monies. And they informed us that, and they told us that the redistribution was to take effect on January 1st. Their letter also informed us, I'm sorry, next slide, please. Their letter also informed us that this was based on a court decision of the city of Chula Vista versus Sandoval and the Southwestern Community College District. Now, in that letter from the Auditor Controller's Office, they had said that it may only affect us by showing us a 13% reduction. And as your finance staff, my job is to say, okay, is it really only 13? So we did a review, a quick review, and my analysis showed that it was going to be bigger than that. So immediately, with the city manager's approval, we sent a request to our property tax consultant, HDL, and told them, please review and let us know where we are. So HDL actually provided a summary, which will be shown in the next few slides. So when Chula Vista first went to court, the trial court ruled in favor of the city, saying, no, the distribution you're doing is correct. So the way we are currently doing the distribution was correct. If you had a pass-through agreement with your redevelopment agency or your successor agency, and you received 100% of your full share of tax increment, if there was any residual revenue, you will no longer receive a portion of that. And that was the ruling. However, next slide, please. They went to appeal, and the appellate court ruled, unfortunately, well, I shouldn't say that. The appellate court ruled in favor of the community, the community college district. They had actually said that pass-through agreements and residual property tax are independent of one another. They are to be allocated without regard to one another. Next slide, please. Meaning, as the county does our actual distribution, if you are a taxing entity and you receive 100% of your share, if there is still any residual left after all pass-through agreements, you will still be entitled to your pro rata share. And which means there are some taxing entities who may now get more than 100% of what we believe is their tax contribution. And HDL also informed us, so did the letter from the Auditor Controller's Office, that since the Supreme Court denied review of the case, the appellate court's decision is final. So, and when HDL provided us, it matched what we were thinking. It wasn't a 13% reduction, it was actually a 33% reduction in our residual RPTTF. Next slide, please. I'm sorry, I think that's incorrect. Can you go to the next one? Thank you. So what I wanted to show, as stated in the report, and this is only for a January allocation, so this is our this is what we got in January, our 6-month allocation. It goes through how much taxes collected, and it deducts the county admin costs and the pass-throughs. And as you can see, line 4 shows the successor agency's required obligations. So based on that, there should have been 3.4 million that should have been distributed to taxing entities. Now, again, if you were a district that was involved in the pass-through cost, technically, would not be receiving any more portion of the residual revenue. Next slide, please. So this is just a summary of how the pass-through affected the city. The first column showed you 3.4 million, and we normally would get 30%. So in January, we should have received $1 million, but we actually only received 691. So that was actually $330,000 less than we should have received for our first RPTTF allocation. And what I wanted to show here is the original entities, and there's only 4, including ERAF, and now the new ones who now are getting the same piece of that pie. Again, it was 3.4 million, and all they did was redistribute it to add all these entities who were already getting 100% of the pass-through. Part of the staff report, I added more detail if City Council wanted to see the actual special districts that were affected and who was getting what. Next slide, please. So what we had to do was go back to the drawing board and re-review all our revenue and expense projections. We had to take into consideration any revenues that have been consistent within the last 2 fiscal years. We took into consideration, after talking to our auditors, if we have delays in receipts, can we still be able to record it in the appropriate fiscal year? And they had agreed, because we are still in the midst of the pandemic, so they're extending that, being able to record revenues in the appropriate fiscal year. And we met again with the city's property tax and sales tax consultants to make sure that our revenues are in line with theirs. And we actually removed COVID-19 related expenditures into its own separate fund, so not to confuse it with general fund revenue and expense versus COVID related activities. Next slide, please. So based on that, again, our columns are showing what was adopted in June 23, 2020, 5.8 million. We had made the adjustments because what we were seeing at the time were all these revenues coming in. We revised our projections at 6.1, but now with all this new methodology for RPTTF, we had to go back and redo our projections. Again, based on most of that we were doing. So we are increasing our property tax by 90,000, and that is just inconsistent, to be consistent with our VLF swap property tax revenues that we get. We are projecting a 450 loss in residual RPTTF. Our franchise fees, I am trying to keep it consistent with what we received the prior year, and same with sales tax. So we are now projecting a year-end revenue of 5.9 million. Next slide, please. And again, we also looked at our expenditures, reducing where we believe is appropriate and still conservative, moving out expenditures where they shouldn't be, and reducing professional and contractual services. So we're eventually reducing and bringing down our expenditures to 5.9 million. Next slide, please. So based on that, we wanted to present to council that in spite of the reduction in revenues, we think that our expenditures are going to be right in line. So other than the 100,000 that was approved by city council to use for additional overtime, we are not requesting the use of additional fund balance. Next slide, please. So at this time, we're going to show City Council what our next steps are. The city manager has reached out to the League of California Cities. The League is currently communicating with other affected cities, and they are assessing all options as how and when to proceed with engaging the state regarding the negative impact to the cities of the redistribution of our residual property taxes. Next step, please. And the city manager will be contacting both our Assembly and Senate representatives to discuss the negative impacts, again, of this change in methodology and see how to best engage the state. That actually concludes my portion. I'm sure Mr. Duffy might want to add to the report.
Thank you, Assistant City Manager Fortune. Did you have further comments you'd like to add, Mr. Duffy?
Mayor, I think I'll just wait for your comments.
Okay. Questions of staff at this time, council members? Councilmember Hussey. Mayor Pro Tem Hussey. That's 3 times. It's because he's sitting on the wrong side.
Ms. Fortune, where is all the extra tax money going to? Is it going to the county, all the RIF, or is it going to the state? I mean, who's getting all our share of our funds?
Mayor Pro Tem, it's actually going to, it's being redistributed to the taxing entities in our successor agency. So if I can, and I didn't put that up, but if I can direct you, sir, to packet page 107 of your staff report. And if you see those first column with numbers highlighted in blue, these are entities that are now receiving that. So the county general fund is now going to see an increase of 440,000. Actually, they did already, because this has been distributed. Flood control zones, the county free library, the county fire protection district is going to receive 358,000. And again, this is for 6 months. So in May or June, they will receive another one. It will not be as high, but it will be close. If we continue, the San Bernardino Valley Municipal Water District is getting an additional 80,000, and the County Office of Education Superintendent of Schools will be getting amounts.
And so, Mayor, if I might add here, Mayor, if you look at packet page 106, that is their distribution currently, and you have to take that number and then add it to the next to the packet page 107, and that's the total number that they'll be receiving for the 6-month period.
Yes.
Councilmember Robles.
So when they do apportionment of taxes, the tax rate area, and these are all sliced and diced, so we always got roughly 19%. So why did we think we would get more? Why did we think we were entitled to more?
Thank you, Councilmember Robles. So on packet page 106, as Mr. Duffy was saying, if you see the city of Grand Terrace, we were only getting 136,000. So we were one of the entities that were not getting our 100% pass-through. And I can only say that to the extent that the people that set up the RDA back in '83 were the ones that made this arrangement. They wanted all the others to get 100% pass-through, but not the general fund. So the way the county originally did this was, if you got 100% already on page 106, if there is residual, you were not going to get any. So as a result, on page 107, where it says original distribution,
So
these
what
were
packet?
only,
So I'm on the city website. So what packet page?
So
On what page?
packet page 106,
On where it says, okay, so way.
yeah, very, almost toward the last end of the. I think it's G5C is the attachment number. That's packet page 106.
Okay. No, what I'm just saying is I don't see anything here out of line with how the tax rate areas are portioned. And the case reinforces that. The Sandoval versus City of Chula Vista.
So what actually happens is, you're right in a sense that we all have a distribution. So what's happened in this particular case is, when redevelopment came on board, these other agencies said, if you make us whole, we won't try to get any share of the residual from the growth. And so what happened is, now what the state has done is said pass-throughs are obligations like your bonds were. And so it's a pass-through's fine, and we were getting 30% of the residual because they weren't included in the residual. And so now what the state court said, no, the pass-throughs are pass-throughs. So ultimately what will happen is this: the allocation or distribution based on AB 8, you will find when you add it all up, some people are getting more than their fair share of percentages. And that's the rub. If the San Bernardino County Fire District is scheduled to get 10% of the allocation, they're getting more than that under this scenario. And that's the rub. And so they're redistributing that tax growth.
So to follow up that, and then so if you have a case that's been appealed and they've refused to hear it, why would we think they're going to hear anything that we're doing?
Well, our issue is this, is the court clearly said, hey, state, you've passed 2 different laws and they're inconsistent. So the state says, we can't even look at common sense to cure this issue. And so what we would hope to do is to have the state who confused this either correct this. Now, we weren't going to get into this, but so we have 2 different tracks that we need to examine. One is that we go and we tell our legislatures, please, can you fix this? And we work with states across the board. The other thing is where the council is probably 75% already in terms of winding down and getting rid of the redevelopment agency. So under this scenario, if we just finish off getting rid of the agency, the pass-through agreements that are obligations all go away, and we go back to the original distribution, which would mean that under the pass-through agreements, it's currently like $3.1 million. So if that goes away, we get our 20% share of that, and magically, it's a $600,000 number that we're losing. So we have 2 tracks to examine here. We can finish off winding down the redevelopment agency, and then all the money goes into one pot, and we all go back to the original share, how it's supposed to be. The other issue is trying to fight the right fight with the state about fixing this. So we have 2 tracks we need to examine, and we'll come back with the council with that strategy.
So Adrian, my understanding from my master's coursework, when this was appealed up and they refused to listen to it, it's dead. So what are we doing here?
Well, as all attorneys do, we always look at different angles and different arguments. So there may be a different argument out there that wasn't raised in the Chula Vista case.
Okay.
I think that's the potential opening.
Okay.
But again, generally the principle you've stated is correct, but we always look at different angles.
Okay, so what I'm not quite understanding then is, if we were to go back to our TRA of 19.97%, how much would we be getting, and what would be the difference between, say, the base year without it? What would be the increase?
Cynthia? So can you ask the question again, please?
Yeah, so if we were to go back to our prior to the pass-through agreements, we were going to get 19.97%. So how much would we be getting more than what we're accustomed to be getting?
So right now, the pass-through agreements represent $3.1 million.
Yeah, but that's not, I'm interested in what we would be getting.
Right, and so our share of that, if the pass-through agreement goes away, is our standard 19.1%, and that would be about $600,000.
So we're getting $600,000 more.
I'm sorry, maybe I misunderstood your question. You said if we went back to what we're supposed to be getting, if the past agreements go away. Right now, we're losing, under the new scenario, last year, what we received was $600,000 more than we're receiving this year, because last year, they didn't count the pass-through agreements as an obligation. Those entities that had pass-through agreements did not get any of the redevelopment property tax trust fund. So when the court case came down this year, they said that, yes, all of those entities that had pass-through agreements would also share in the revenue, and your original distribution would go forward. So we had an agreement that we would get 30% because of the pass-through agreements, and the court has said, no, you could only get your original 19 point some odd percent. And that's where we are, and that's why we have that $600,000 loss in terms of what we got last year versus this year.
Yeah, but what was see, we're not talking on the same page.
Okay,
Okay, so you have a baseline property tax allocation.
yes.
Okay, so because we defease the bonds, we don't have that money obligated anymore to those bonds. So your tax base, which is different from a residual, how much does it grow?
So all of those bond proceeds, the obligations, when you freed that money up, that went into the RPTTF. And you were going to get 30% of that, and that's what you got last year. Now that the law has changed, you're now back to 19% of that.
Yeah.
And the other groups came in and they got their original share. Yeah, and so it's a very important point is our argument is that there is AB8 distribution allocation, and everybody should be able to fall under that same scenario. But when you take the pass-through agreements and you say it's an obligation like bonds, those people get that money, and then they also participate in the redevelopment property tax trust fund. And so we're back to the original distribution, but we don't get a pass-through and the distribution. We just get the original 19% distribution across the board.
Which is going to increase because we don't have obligations out there.
And that's what happened last year. And because now this year,
Yeah, so we need to see 3 years of numbers, is what I'm getting at. You have to get three, because part of this mess with the redevelopment agencies and the pass-through was they were getting a pass-through because they were going to be getting the increment of the tax. So they were losing something.
right, so they were going to, so agencies that signed on for the pass-through said, okay, we'll just take our money now, and you can share with the increase in the
Right.
in the growth. That's exactly where we were last year. And when you defeased the bonds, all of that revenue went into the RPTTF, and then we benefited from that because we didn't have a.
But we're talking two different pots of money. Baseline general fund, and then RPTA.
Yes, so the property tax comes in, and that's the baseline. And in the baseline, the pass-through agreements were taken out in the baseline. And then it said whatever left is called the residual funding. And then based on.
Yeah, but those still two different. So when you guys come back, I'm sure you get the gist of what I'm looking for. But that's,
okay.
it's
Yeah, we can elaborate that. We'll show some slides on that.
Councilmember Wilson.
So bottom line is the higher court didn't do its job. If it would not have refused to review the situation based on the litigation, and I read this stuff ad nauseum. It's disgusting in the point that it is typical, let's banter it back and forth a few million times and come up with the consensus that it was ambiguous. The language of the two documents are ambiguous, unfortunately. And since ordinarily when we run in that kind of circumstance, they zero each other out, instead somebody made the brilliant suggestion that since we need a little more money in this pocket, we'll just open it up to the standard pro rata allocation. And the pro rata allocation, of course, shorts us on what we need, but it funds the heck out of the schools and a couple of more bucks, which is exactly what the state wanted to do to begin with. So Chula Vista versus Sandoval, I don't know. Just seems to me that it's a little spooky in the way it all evolved. So if we're fortunate enough to get the higher court to get off its butt and re-review, which is what they needed to do, because it was a landlocked decision. And instead, they just didn't elect to even, entertain it, which is not what they're allowed to do, really, under normal law circumstances.
And sir, I think what the court said was, the legislature tried 3 times to fix this thing. And every time they did, they just made a mess of it. And so I read it to the point of, if you want this change, the legislature needs to clarify this. But then through our discussions that happened with Adrian and Cynthia, and they're telling me that the pass-through is this, and I'm asking this question about the pass-through, and it turns out that, the pass-through agreements are obligations of the redevelopment agency. When the redevelopment agency goes away, so do the pass-through. And we're back to the magic number of we all get our fair share. Right. And our fair share is we get $600,000 more in the next year if agency goes away. Now, we've already gone through defeasing the bonds, selling off the redevelopment agency. We've got maybe a few more things to finish off, and then we've completed our goal of eliminating redevelopment agency in the city. And then it's all one big bucket, and we all share the bucket based on those AB 8 allocations. And so that might be a better fight for us than the legislative fight.
And so when is that projected to happen?
We'll come back to you on that, because we have to come back and show you what the final steps are in eliminating the redevelopment agency. We have some obligations we need to finish off on, so we'll come back and with a strategy on that.
Madam Mayor, they built into the agreement, it says May or June. So that's how far away we are from it. So we should be looking at, with government time, it's probably September, but, May or June.
Okay. Further questions? Councilmember Hussey and then Mayor Pro Tem Hussey and then Councilmember Allen.
My thing is, seeing the increases that the county gets, the 440,000, and then what the fire department gets, 358. Our biggest budget is, of course, the sheriff's, and then the county for the fire. We just voted for a tax increase, so now they're getting this plus our tax increase. So, is that the residents are, it's a double whammy again. I mean, that's countywide. So I'm sure Grand Terrace this is just Grand Terrace. What's the other cities donating? So that's what seems really messed up. I'm paying extra taxes, and then they're giving extra taxes for this. And is the county gonna say, hey, we're gonna give you a break now on this? I don't think they are, but that's what upsets me about seeing that.
Yes, sir. And I had the conversation with our city attorneys saying, hey, come on, we have these pass-through agreements with these guys. And aren't they contractual obligations? How can they do this to us, and so on and so on? But the law is the law, and really, it's the legislature who the court looked at what they did and decided. I mean, it wasn't San Bernardino County that was advocating for this. It was the state legislature that did this, and the court said, this makes no sense. You've conflicted yourself out. We can't use logic or reason to solve this problem.
So is county fire going to be over their budget now?
No.
They're getting this money and plus our tax money.
Well, sir, I would say this, and I can only speak for our scenario. So if county fire in the past told us that it would be about $2.2 million to provide service to the city, they were getting $1 million, and FP5 gave them $600,000. With this scenario here, it's another $700,000. So 1,600,000, 700,000, they're at $2.3 million. So they're whole as in terms of service for us.
Councilmember Allen.
I'll pass, Mayor, thanks.
All right, thank you.
Can't top what Mayor Pro Tem is.
What's that?
No, I was seconding Mayor Pro Tem's comments.
okay.
I was going to go
Okay,
down that line, but
you had the same issues.
already,
Okay,
yeah.
very good. All right, are there any requests to speak on this item?
No, Madam Mayor.
All right, we'll close public comment and come back. We have this as a receive and file, so is there any more discussion? And if not, I'll entertain a motion to receive and file.
I'll make the motion, receive and file, Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember Allen.
I'll second.
Okay, so we have a motion by Councilmember Allen and a second by Mayor Pro Tem Hussey to receive and file the budget updates. Would you please call the vote?
Councilmember Allen?
Yes.
Councilmember Wilson?
Yes, right around
Councilmember
five.
Robles?
Okay.
Mayor Pro Tem Hussey?
Yes.
Mayor McNamara?
Yes,
Motion passes unanimously.
thank you. We have no request for future agenda items by the City Council, so we'll move to City Council communications, and we're going to start off tonight with the subcommittee/ad hoc committee communications. We have Mayor Pro Tem Hussey and Councilmember Doug Wilson, who have a report about the oath of office, acceptable code of conduct, and censure policy applicable to the City Council. Gentlemen.
Ready? Madam Mayor,
You can let Mr. Wilson do it.
Councilman,
I entitled it, How Do We Get Here? How Did We Get Here?
How did we
As the
get here?
As the council will recall, our overall quest to review the council's policies and procedures began several months ago. And at the leadership of Councilwoman Robles, there was much input. About a month ago, breaking away from that, about a month ago, the council appointed an ad hoc committee to explore enforcement standards. The ad hoc committee was made up of the city manager, city attorney, Mayor Pro Tem Hussey, and Councilman Wilson. One face-to-face meeting and 3 drafts later, the committee has reached a consensus on form and format, and it is our pleasure to report that the oath of office, acceptable code of conduct, and censure code is ready for council review. Note that the oath of office, acceptable code of conduct, and censure code will be applicable to all Grand Terrace legislative branches, in other words, from City Council on down. Madam Mayor, the city manager can address further processing scheduling.
Mr. Hussey, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, I'd just like to thank Mr. Wilson for all his input on that, Councilman Wilson, and then us working together, and Councilman Robles, setting the stage for it. So, but I think we all worked pretty good as a team, and I think this will be the betterment of the city with this new thing that we came out with to help all committees get a fair and equal poll on this, and I'm just happy it's done, and I think, it came out pretty good. So, layman's terms. Pat yourself on the back.
All right, thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Mr. Duffy, do you have any process explanations or timelines you'd like to share with us?
Yes, Mayor. So I believe that the city attorney will be bringing back the code of conduct at the next city council meeting on the 23rd. If that's approved by the council, then we'll follow up in April with the entire policies and procedures to come back to the council for approval.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, and thank you, gentlemen, for your work. And thank you, Councilmember Robles, for getting the ball rolling. We will move into our regular council reports. Councilmember Jeff Allen.
Thanks, Mayor. So I just would like to report that this past Sunday, I went on the hike up Blue Mountain. It was a great event, as usual. There was, hundreds of people that I saw there. I was most of the morning on the mountain, and it was just a constant stream. So it was a great event. Accolades to the city, and I need to also, I've been asked to relay this message. Ms. Elliott, Ms. Flo Elliott gave me a call, and as you know, she's on one of the leaders of the Friends of Blue Mountain, and she wanted to express her thanks personally and also from the organization, the Friends of Blue Mountains, for all the city's support for this event this year. And they raised $960 in contributions that day. And so she was very excited about that. And so that's my report, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Allen. Councilmember Doug Wilson. Thank you. Councilmember Sylvia Robles. Nothing, thank you. Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Bill Hussey.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, this is the first year I didn't get to go up on Blue Mountain. I actually have another job as a couples minister, so that was my first kickoff, so I missed that hike. But I wanted to thank all the city staff and all the volunteers who put it together. It's a lot of work, and you guys taking your weekend out to help the city and stuff. It's always a great success. You know, hiking that mountain, you know, I'm looking forward to when it's open year-round. And I'm also I got another granddaughter, Lila Drew Hussey. She was born Saturday, 9 pounds, 2 ounces. So 9 pounds. Baby, yeah, this baby and mother's doing fine. And wow, so 3 granddaughters. I feel my son's going to have to work a lot of overtime. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. All right, I have a couple of meetings I attended. First with Omnitrans, we authorized for the CEO and general manager to issue a call for public hearings. And the reason we did that, part of it is it's a regular process of bringing the annual service plan forward to the board of directors. If you remember, we had a service plan from Omnitrans that reduced the service throughout the whole service area, and it did affect Grand Terrace. So based on the Federal Transit Administration regulations and Omnitrans public participation plan, any changes that impact the route service miles, service hours, route miles, or passengers by more than 25% requires a public hearing. And so not only did they have a plan to reduce our service, but service was considerably reduced during the last year because of COVID. So with the FTA regulations requiring this service equity analysis, Omnitrans is going to create public hearings, and they will seek feedback broadly in 3 different areas. One is the Omnitrans COVID-related service changes. And so, as I said, Omnitrans twice reduced service, so in March of 2020 and April of 2020, before slightly resuming service in September. And currently, Omnitrans directly operated fixed route service is operating at 63% of revenue hours of pre-COVID levels. And so this currently anticipated to last through summer of this year, and that exceeds the 12 months and requires public input. They will also look at service resumption prioritization, and they do have a pretty extensive plan for that, and they will look at short-range transit planning. So these are some of the ways that they are trying to fill in the gaps from the fixed route. These will be Zoom-based public hearings, and they are scheduled for Monday, March 22nd at 6 p.m., Friday, March 26th at noon, Saturday, March 27th at 11 a.m., and Tuesday, March 30th at 7 p.m., and more information is on the Omnitrans website. One of the challenges that Omnitrans has had with their budget is a mandate by the state that all of their buses must be electric by a certain date in the future, and so they were pleased to announce to the board that the first electric buses have received their full promotional wrap, and the design will be displayed on all 4 of the electric buses that they have received at this time. Well, they didn't receive them, they purchased them. And so for the 6 months of service, they will have a special wrap on them to show the riders that they are riding on electric buses. This promotes the clean air benefits of the zero-emission vehicles. They are also working to outfit radio and additional hardware installations that are needed. Fleet and safety training instructors are being trained in operation by the vehicle manufacturer, and coach operators will be next. The infrastructure construction to support these electric vehicles is continuing in East and West Valley, and is expected to have these vehicles in service in April. So if you don't normally ride the bus, keep an eye out for electric buses that might be coming through. And if you do ride the bus and you get a special wrapped bus, you'll know that you are on one of the new updated buses that are all electric. So this was on March 3rd, so I also attended SBCTA. We did a few things there. Our normal receipt of procurement reports for December and January, the procurement audit results for the last year. We looked at Measure I revenue, and we received a full report on the receipts. We adopted fiscal year 21-22 budget assessment dues. That's what all the members' agency pays. We also approved extension requests for fiscal year 1920 Measure Local I Street Program Fund Audit. And when I say that, what I mean is there are members of SBCTA that have not completed their Measure I Local Street Program Fund Audit. I was very happy to see that Grand Terrace was not on that list. We have ours in on time. Thank you very much to the finance staff. Business Continuity Management Program Policy and SBCTA Enterprise Continuity of Operations. This whole organization came up with quite an extensive plan on business continuity, which I know we have a hazard mitigation plan and we have a few other emergency operations plan. It would be really interesting to know if part of that is a business continuity management program. This really came into play when SBCTA staff went remote, and they started looking at all the different ways that service might be interrupted if they were not to be able to work as normal, and so they came up with a pretty extensive plan, and that would be something interesting for us to look at. And then lastly, we approved a revised Measure I 2010 to 2040 revenue estimate. It was an increase of $196 million, and the reason that we did that was sales tax revenues increased mainly due to continuing acceleration in online shopping, in addition to last year's implementation of the Wayfair versus South Dakota Supreme Court decision that requires out-of-state vendors to collect and remit sales and use tax. So the sales tax estimate was based on the current economic trends, and the impacts of COVID-19 pandemic were not as extreme as was anticipated as we saw in our city. And the development of the FY 2021 budget, they continue to look at that. They're uncertain if there might be a change. So they'll continue to monitor it, but for right now, it's good news for all the cities that take part in the Measure I. And lastly, thank you very much for the hike on Blue Mountain. It was a wonderful morning. The weather couldn't have been more perfect, so kudos to staff for arranging that. But they also put in a lot of work making sure that the path was clear and that we had a safe area to walk. So thank you very much to that. And that will conclude my report. Next, we have City Manager Communications, Mr. Duffy.
And I have none, Mayor.
All right. Well, then there's nothing left to do because we do not have a closed session. So at this time, I will adjourn to the next regular City Council meeting, which will be held Tuesday, March 23rd, 2021 at 6 p.m. Any request to have an item placed on a future agenda must be made in writing and submitted to the City Clerk's office, and the request will be processed in accordance with council procedures. Thank you all for your attendance and your discussion. We are adjourned.